Paul. Let's get after it, guys. Okay. So we're going to have a good 30 minutes here to go through these slides. And then if we have some time at the end, you guys can ask a question or two. If not, you can reach directly to me afterwards. So as we said in the schedule, we're going to be covering COSO and ERM, but primarily the focus here is going to be on enterprise risk management. So I mean, that's not to say that COSO isn't going to be important for the BEC exam, but ultimately enterprise risk management is unique to the BEC exam. And just to confirm, it looks like my screen is shared, so we're good to go. So yeah, enterprise risk management is unique to the BEC exam. So some of you have taken audit up to this point. So we're going to talk COSO at the highest of levels, just ultimately understanding what it is, because if you have a fundamental understanding of COSO, you at least have, when you see these questions, it's not going to be a brand new concept. Whereas enterprise risk management is a little bit newer, and in that it is specific to business environment concepts and managerial accounting. It's much more specific to risk management, and it sort of falls within the COSO framework. And it's sort of the subcategory of COSO that has to do with the board of directors and their ultimate management of risk. So let's just dive right into it. This is a high level breakout of the two frameworks. So when I say frameworks, I mean, think of these as the rule books. Okay, so if we're talking COSO in the audit section or COSO in the BEC section, this is management's internal control framework. Okay, so when I say that, I mean, when you're thinking of management and their overall responsibilities, yes, it is going to be to properly present financial statements. And no, this is not the audit section, even though we're talking in audit language. This is more specific to management's system of internal controls. So it's still a rule book for how management designs, implements, and maintains internal controls. So what are internal controls? These are systems and processes that ensure that the company is basically eliminating or mitigating the chances of incorrectly stating their financial statements and just basically doing their jobs. Okay, so the framework, again, this is a rule book. Think of it as sort of the guidelines to how management is going to have a strong system of internal controls. Okay, so this is what we call the COSO cube. Obviously, this isn't going to be something that you need to memorize by any shape or form, but you do need to know what is within the COSO framework. Okay, so for those of you who have not taken audit, this might be a little bit newer information. So I definitely recommend going back into the study materials and obtaining more of a thorough understanding of COSO and the different elements within it. And it's not just about remembering the first 5 elements of COSO, right? We have the control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication and monitoring activities. All right, yes, you should know what those 5 elements are like the back of your hand, but you need to know specifically the details and the bullets that outline all of these 5 categories. Okay, so we have operations, reporting, and compliance. And this is broken out into basically a macro view and more of a micro view. Okay, so we have a strong system of internal controls at the entity level, but we also have that at the division level, the operating unit level, and by function. Okay, but again, while internal controls in the COSO framework is important, and I do highly encourage you to go back and take a look at this stuff, the purpose of this lecture is going to be focusing more so on the ERM framework. Okay, so that stands for Enterprise Risk Management. And we are going to essentially talk about how it is management and the board of directors' responsibility to create value to the client by minimizing and managing risk. Okay, so the ERM framework, and primarily what the exam wants you to know, are the 5 components or the 5 elements of the ERM framework, right? And it's very tempting to look at all of these and just kind of, skim through it and act like you just know it, because you're looking at it, you say, okay, governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, performance, revision and review and revision, and information communication and reporting. Easy enough to memorize these first 5, but that isn't what is going to be important in getting these questions right. And there are 20 components of the ERM framework. Okay, so if you see within this, we have 5 components within governance and culture. We have 4 components within strategy and objective setting. We have 5 components of performance, 3 components of review and revision, and 3 components of information communication and reporting. And very tempting to just make flashcards. And while, yes, you can get these questions right by just memorizing your way through it and creating a bunch of flashcards for this and just hammering it over and over and over, yeah, that might work. And I'm not going to say don't do it. But where I do recommend you go the extra mile and increasing your chances of getting these questions right is really digging into the logic behind why each of these components fall within each category of the ERM framework. All right, so we're just going to dive right into it. The 5 elements, but first we're thinking about the overall purpose of ERM. So the reasons for enterprise risk management. Okay, so when you associate enterprise risk management, take a step back and think about who this impacts. Who's this framework talking to? And think of the board of directors. Okay, so COSO is a framework more so for management and how they're ultimately designing their internal controls and implementing them. The ERM framework is more directed towards the board of directors. Okay, so the overall idea of ERM is for board of directors to provide value to the shareholders by managing risk. So these 4 components of the ERM framework, of the value process, right? How they're creating value is something that you should know. There are questions that can be seen on the exam that identify what is the definition of each of these 4 value items. Okay, so what is value creation? What is value preservation, value erosion, and value realization? Okay, so value creation ultimately means that we have successfully launched a new initiative. So the benefits of what our investment was or the output of our investment, right? The benefits outweighed the cost of that venture. Okay, so a great example is we successfully launched a new product. So value erosion, I'm going to skip over value preservation and come back to it. Value erosion is just the opposite. This is bad news for the company. Okay, so value erosion means we are eroding, we are regressing. Okay, so this means that the cost of business is greater than the benefits. Okay, so we had an unsuccessful launch of a new product. So value erosion, value creation, I want you to really just make sure that you know the differences between the two. Very easy points if you see a question that has to do with value specific to enterprise risk management. All right, value preservation, what does the word preserve mean? It means to basically withstand, right? So to preserve something, preservation means sustained success in this context. Okay, so we are basically maintaining customer satisfaction, right? Our value is being sustained. And again, when you're thinking about the board of directors and their objectives to sustain value for the shareholder, that means that they are looking out for the best interest of the shareholder. We want to make sure that the launch of a new product is successful, that the success of this company is sustained, and that we are, if everybody can mute their computer, that'd be great.
Where else did you go?
If you guys, we might have just a second. I'm not sure what's going on. Just if everybody can make sure that their computers are muted, that'd be awesome. Sorry, so value realization is the final component. And basically this indicates that that the value has been increased somehow, whether it's monetarily or non-monetarily. Okay, so a good example of that would be dividends to the shareholders, right? Value has now been realized by the shareholders. So everything up to this point indicates that we're looking out for the shareholders. So quick example, Pink Corp successfully launched a new product line of its product A and unsuccessfully launched a product B, all right? So it was subsequently discontinued by the company. Which of the following best describes the results of product A and product B? So because product A was successfully launched, that's going to indicate that this has to do with value creation, whereas the unsuccessful launch of product B represents product erosion because it was unsuccessfully launched. All right, so again, just know the differences between the two there. Unsuccessful launch is going to be value erosion. successful launch, value creation. Okay, so those are little things to keep in mind. But now we're going to dive into the meat and potatoes of ERM. Okay, so we have 5 high-level components of ERM, and then we have 20 subcategories of ERM. So again, yes, it does make sense to make this a flashcard strategy and just put all of these in a flashcard and make sure you just memorize them. But when you're going through this, also think about why is it that this has to do with each of these categories. Okay, so governance and culture, we have review and revision, we have information and communication, strategy and objective setting, and performance. Okay, so we're going to remember the CRISP mnemonic. Okay, so CRISP like potato chips. Okay, so this, while the ERM framework has, a specific outline, because we're creating mnemonics here and we're going to try to facilitate some memory aids and retention, we're going to put this in an order that is aligned with the mnemonics. Okay, so governance and culture. When you're thinking of governance and culture, we're thinking about the tone at the top. Okay, so the tone at the top basically means that we are committed to our core values. So the 5 components of governance and culture basically are that we define the desired culture. We attract, develop, and retain capable individuals. That's the I in DISCO. The D in DISCO is for defines desired culture. We are establishing operating structures. So operating structures, the structure component is going to be what we're thinking about in our DISCO mnemonic. Demonstrates commitment to core values. So that's a key buzzword, and they like to ask this in questions. Sometimes I've seen it, a few times. Anytime you see a commitment to core values, that has to do with the tone at the top, right? We're setting our overall control environment. So when you're thinking back on the COSO framework, the control environment has to do with the tone at the top, right? When we're thinking about managing our internal controls or a strong system of internal controls. A demonstration of commitment to core values, same concept. Okay, so exercising board risk oversight. The ultimate idea here, again, of ERM is looking out for the shareholders, but by specifically managing risk. Okay, so that's ultimately how we are going to be looking out for the best interest of the shareholders. Okay, so oversight is going to be key. Okay, so defines desired culture. Basically, we want to know what kind of culture are we looking for? Do we want an aggressive culture or do we want more of a conservative culture, right? At the end of the day, this is all about risk management. So thinking about what culture are we setting when we're thinking about the tone at the top? Are we going to be aggressive with how we are attacking risk, right? So that's risk aggressive. Are we going to be conservative? So that is risk averse. Okay, or are we risk neutral? Meaning we don't really have a preference on risk. We're pretty indifferent. Very rarely are companies going to be risk neutral. The majority of times, the strategies that they're going to take are either more on the averse side or more on the aggressive side. So just think about what it is you're thinking about, or what it is the culture is related to this specific company that you see. Okay, but defines desired culture. That is the D in our DISCO mnemonic. Attracts, develops, and retains capable individuals. Okay, so what are we thinking about here? We're thinking about hiring. Okay, so when we're thinking about hiring, there's 2 sets of hiring strategies, right? We can either hire executives or more senior management, or we can hire other personnel, right? Like managers or staff members, people working in the shipping departments or the purchasing departments. Okay, so human resources is generally going to be who is responsible for hiring this type of personnel. But again, the most important takeaway here is understanding how this ties back to the overall governance and culture, right? The tone at the top. We need to hire the right people. The S in DISCOs has to do with structures. So we're establishing operating structures. So an operating structure is specific to what it is, everything related to the operation. So one example that I always like to refer to is what is our compensation structure, right? That falls within the overall operation. So how are we paying our people? Are we paying them on a fixed salary, or is this going to be more of a commission-based salary structure or a commission-based compensation structure, right? You get out there and you sell, you take a cut of what you sell. Demonstrates commitment to core values. So you're thinking about the code of professional or developing a code of professional conduct. So if you think back on audit, for some of you who've taken audit already, a code of professional conduct guideline essentially is a rule book for the professional themselves. Okay, so if you join us in our audit section, or you've already taken our course with Universal for audit, you might remember that the code of professional conduct is the rule book for the auditor. Okay, so demonstrating a commitment to core values when you're thinking about management has to do with developing a code of professional conduct for management. Okay, exercise board oversight. Anytime you see the word oversight, guys, always think of the overall culture, the overall environment of the company. Okay, so board oversight has to do with the commitment to core values. This is always going to be part of governance and culture. Okay, so we're thinking of the BABE mnemonic when we're thinking of strategy and objective setting. So if you have a pen and paper that you're taking notes with, not totally mandatory, but if you do have pen and paper, write down mission and vision of the company. Okay, so this is the mission and the vision of the company. And this is, these are buzzwords that the exam will throw into questions. Which of the following best represents the mission or the vision of the company? You're always thinking of the overall strategy and objective setting response. Okay, so we have the B in BABE, which is analyze business context. The A is appetite. So you're thinking of risk appetite. Okay, and we're going to dive into this and when we get into the details. Having a business objective, right? Formulating business objectives are going to be important. We want, it's thinking about objective setting. What is the overall mission? What are we looking to accomplish? Evaluates alternative strategies. Okay, so if none of this ends up really, if what it is we strategized for and how we decided, or the route we decided to go doesn't end up working out, what is our alternative strategy? Okay, so we need to think about our fallback plans. Okay, so that is ultimately what you need to remember. Again, we're not memorizing, we're trying to understand. So analyzing business context, we want to know who is it that we are in the industry. Okay, so what is our presence? Are we a newer company with minimum resources, or are we a company that establishes, a lot of consistency and we can put out a new product line very easily and people are going to buy it because of our brand? Okay, so who are we within the industry? When it's about understanding and analyzing business context, we want to understand the risks related to the business, both internal and external. So what are examples of internal and external risk factors? So I know I keep tying back to audit because this is, all kind of sort of interrelated, especially when you think about COSO and the framework for internal controls and assessing and understanding risk. We're talking more so about management's risk assessment as opposed to the auditor's risk assessment in this case. Okay, but when you're thinking about internal and external risks, I want you to think about audit risk. For those of you who understand that, if you don't understand it, ignore it. But when you're thinking about internal risk, you're thinking about the management's risk, right? The risk that they're essentially not going to do their jobs. So for those of you who've taken audit with me, you might be thinking about control risk factors. Okay, but if you haven't, again, ignore it. Internal risk is going to be management's risk, whereas external risks are thought of as inherent risk factors, right? Things that are sort of outside of our control. The economy, complexities within the business, heavy cash flow, cash volume, things like that. So again, inherent risk and control risk factors for those of you who understand what I'm talking about, but otherwise internal and external risk, same concept. Risks within our business versus risks that are out of our control that are external. Okay, so how is it that we're defining risk appetite? When you're thinking about appetite, you might be thinking about food, right? You're thinking about how much do I want to eat? Do I have a big appetite? Do I have a small appetite? What am I looking to do here? And when you think about appetite related to risk, same concept. How much risk am I willing to assume? Is it a lot of risk? Am I risk tolerant, or am I risk averse? Maybe I'm not willing to take much risk. Maybe I'm super conservative. So when you're thinking about risk appetite, we have two different factors. We have qualitative factors and quantitative factors. Qualitative and quantitative, they are what they sound like. Okay, quantitative has to do with numbers, right? So how much of the risk is going to impact the cost of the business? We can measure it by looking at those numbers. Whereas qualitative risk and understanding our qualitative risk factors as they pertain to risk appetite have to do with coming up with a short list of risks that need to be prioritized above others, right? So just sort of objectively thinking about this, based on the information that I've gathered, maybe from talking to people, these are the additional risk factors that are more qualitative. They can't be measured by numbers. Formulating business objectives. Okay, so this is the other B in the BEC mnemonic. Okay, so they must be measurable. So at the end of the day, we need to think about our overall risks, and we need to say, okay, this is definitively the amount of risk that that's involved here. Okay, so it has to be able to be measured, whether it's numerically, whether it's just by other forms of output. So at the end of the day, if it is measurable, that means that we're able to formulate business objectives. And then finally, alternative strategies. Based on the information that we've collected, do we have an alternative to mitigating this risk? Okay, so if this doesn't work out, what can we do to improve our chances of having less risk in the future? Okay, so moving on into the P in our CRISP mnemonic. Okay, so within this, we have a sub mnemonic of drips. Okay, so like dripping water. So this is basically indicating that we have different levels of risk. Okay, again, if you have a pen and paper next to you, I'd suggest maybe writing this down. Okay, so when you're thinking about performance, you're thinking about the fact that our overall risk, the overall response to risk can be measured and evaluated both at the entity level as well as the division and department level, right? So just because we launched a new product line and it failed horribly, that doesn't necessarily mean that our company is going to go bankrupt, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the entity is going to suffer as a whole. So that is the key takeaway when you're thinking about the overall performance. Okay, so at the end of the day, we're asking ourselves, how did we do? Okay, so the D in DRIP stands for develops a portfolio view. So this is more of a macro view. Okay, we're going to implement risk responses. We're going to identify risk, prioritize risk, and assess the severity of risk. Okay, so the D in our DRIPS mnemonic stands for develops a portfolio view. So like I said, this is a macro view. We need to understand the impact on the entire company. Okay, and that's what's going to be most important when understanding and evaluating this risk. All right, so if it negatively impacted the entire company, that's going to be problematic. All right, so on the other hand, if we have an impact to the business division, that might not necessarily impact the entire company. It might just impact that one division. If this is a multi-divisional company with a lot of different products, a lot of different business lines, just because that division goes down doesn't necessarily mean it's going to impact the entire company. And same goes for the impact on a business product. Okay, so we need to remember developing a portfolio view. Implementing risk responses. Okay, so implementing a risk response has to do with what we're doing to mitigate this risk. Okay, so there are a few different options when it comes to mitigating risk. We have risk acceptance, we have the reduction to risk, we can share risk, or we might not accept it at all. Okay, so if we're accepting risk, we're saying, look, we don't really care about this overall risk, right? At the end of the day, are we going to be in trouble if this doesn't work out? Probably not. Let's go ahead and accept the risk. All right, reduction of risk has to do with the matters that we take into our own hands to deliberately bring down this risk. Okay, so what is the strategy there to reduce risk? We could share risk. So if you're thinking about sharing risk, this is sharing the risk with an external party. Okay, so a great example of this is going to be insurance policies. All right, so I'm worried that we're susceptible to floods in this building. It's inevitable if it happens. If it happens, it happens. But am I going to be on the hook for paying for all of that damage? Well, an option there could be obtaining an insurance policy. If that does happen, we can go ahead and have them pay for it. If there's no acceptance at all, so if we're not accepting the risk, then a good example is just saying we're exiting this business altogether. Okay, so there's risk that this isn't going to work out. This investment's not going to work out. What are we going to do about it? We can exit the business altogether. We're not going to accept this risk. Okay, so no response that can reduce this risk. We're in trouble if we do this no matter what. Okay, identifying risk. So this is more so the first thought when you're thinking about the P in the CRISP mnemonic. Before doing anything else, we want to identify what the risks are. All right, so we want to understand how is this going to impact the performance of the business. Good example of this, thinking of the risk of disruption. All right, so if I'm investing in blockbuster video in the early 2000s, late 90s, whenever that failed, were you aware of the fact that streaming was possible, and that Netflix was going to come in and just disrupt the entire industry? So identifying what the risks are when entering a new business line or a new product is going to be key, because if there is a risk of disruption or a risk that this isn't going to work out, that needs to be identified. How are we going to prioritize risk? All right, so thinking about our priority meter, right? Is this a high level risk, medium level, or low level? All right, so what's the overall priority when it comes to addressing these risks? And how is it going to impact the overall business? Is it going to impact it at the entity level, right? If we mess this up, the entire entity is going to suffer. All right, if that's the case, then that's going to be a problem. Whereas if this is at the operating or division level, we want to understand, all right, if that risk, if this doesn't work out, is this going to negatively impact us in a way that is still recoverable? Maybe so, maybe not, right? Maybe this division is so important to the success of the company, it makes up 35% of our revenue. If all of our resources go down with this division, our entire entity suffers to a point of no recovery. Review and revision. When you're thinking about review and revision, you're thinking about understanding how it is we ultimately managed risk, right? We went through the motions. We did everything within the enterprise risk management framework. Were we successful or not? And if not, what are we doing to improve in the future? So you're thinking about the RAP mnemonic, all right, like rap music. We have reviews, risk, and performance, assesses substantial change, and pursues improvement in enterprise risk management. Okay, so this one's short and sweet. Review, risk, and performance. We're understanding if the risk mitigation strategy was effective, if we're assessing substantial changes, if there are massive changes that occurred within this business, we want to understand, how it impacted the business strategy, the internal changes, right? This could be changes in senior leadership. If we had changes, if we hired a new COO or CEO, how does that impact the overall business? External changes, same concept. Maybe there's a substitute product in the market. Okay, so we have, we are invested in water, but water bottles disrupted how it is we drink water. Maybe that's going to be something that we need to consider. Substantial changes, anything that might be disruptive to the market or disruptive to our overall business. That's what it is we were talking about. And then finally, pursuing improvements in enterprise risk management. We're now in the review phase, right? So we're thinking about everything that has happened up to this point. And we're constantly, if things, whether they did work out, maybe they didn't work out, we still want to improve in the future. Okay, so we're looking for ways to continue to improve our risk. Okay, so we want to have the highest level of return while sustaining the lowest level of risk. All right, that's kind of the sweet spot and ultimately what it is we're looking for as a business. Okay, so information, communication, and reporting. This is how it is we're reporting risk. Okay, so this is obtaining information, processing that information, and then spitting it out into the form of a report. Okay, so reports on risk culture and performance, leverages information systems, and communicates risk information. All right, obtaining information, processing it, and reporting it has to do with information, communication, reporting. We know that. Reporting on risk. All right, so this is the P in our PIC mnemonic. Sorry, I didn't mention our mnemonic here. P stands for performance, I stands for information systems, C stands for communication. Okay, so the P stands for performance. So the overall performance of managing risk. We want to leverage the information, right? How are we going to use it going forward, we got to make sure that it's fair, accurate, complete, and timely. Right. So we want to be able to leverage this information to our benefit. And then finally, communicating the risk information. So it needs to be communicated effectively to who it is that we are reporting this to, internally and externally to stakeholders. All right. So at the end of the day, like I said, the whole objective here is basically managing risk and looking out for the best interest in the stakeholders as a company. All right, that's kind of the whole purpose of board of directors, right? They're not necessarily executives in the company, but they do have oversight and they are looking out for the best interest in the investors. So that's what's key. Quick multiple choice question here, and then we will wrap it up. According to the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, which of the following components of ERM addresses commitment to core values? Okay, so thinking about core values, okay, this is the tone at the top. So we need to think of the buzzwords that we went through. And when you're going back and studying this, really hone in on what it is our buzzwords are. Because if you can remember little things like core values or commitment to core values, you're thinking about the C in the crisp mnemonic, which is going to have to do with governance and culture, okay? So governance and culture is the C within our crisp mnemonic, which is going to demonstrates commitment to core values. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up with that. We are going to post the homeworks here in just a few minutes. If you guys want to go through some of the questions that have to do with everything we talked about, we're also going to post the lectures. And we're also going to put up the focus notes from this specific topic. So that's really meant to narrow your focus on everything we covered. Go through it. The point of this is really just to stay accountable and make sure that you're going through some of these key concepts that are definitively going to get tested, maybe having a different way of thinking about this going forward, simplifying it. And just if you have any questions whatsoever, make sure to reach out to me. And I am more than happy to help you think through any of this stuff. Okay, guys, well, it was great. And if you guys want to leave any comments here in the chat, feel free to do so. And I will address it from there. We'll see you guys next time.